I am 26 years old, and for the first 3 months of my marriage, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Mark was everything I had ever wanted. He was kind, funny, and he loved me in a way that made me feel safe. My family loved him too. My dad, David, treated him like the son he never had. My mom, Sharon, was perhaps his biggest fan. At our wedding, her hug for him lasted just a little too long. Her hand rested on his back, her fingers pressing into the fabric of his suit. She whispered something in his ear, something that made him smile a private, gentle smile. "Welcome to the family, son," she had said loud enough for me to hear. But the look in her eyes was something else entirely. I told myself I was imagining things. It was an emotional day. She was just happy for her only daughter. The feeling of unease started as a small, quiet thing. It was like a tiny pebble in my shoe. At first, I could ignore it, but with every step, it grew more insistent. It began at our first family dinner as a married couple. We were at my parents' house, the one I grew up in. The smell of my mom's roast chicken filled the air, a scent that had always meant comfort and home. But that night, it felt different. I watched my mom as she moved around the kitchen. She kept finding reasons to be near Mark. She would brush past him, her arm touching his. She refilled his glass of wine before it was even half empty. She laughed at every single one of his jokes, a high, girlish laugh that I hadn't heard in years. It was the kind of laugh a woman uses when she wants a man to notice her. I glanced at my dad. He was at the head of the table, carving the chicken, completely oblivious. He was just happy to have his family around him. He smiled at Mark, a warm, genuine smile. "It's good to have you here, Mark," he said. "Really good." Mark smiled back. "It's good to be here, David," he replied. His eyes, however, flickered toward my mom for just a second. I saw it. It was a quick, almost imperceptible glance, but it was there. It was a shared look, a secret look. The pebble in my shoe suddenly felt a lot bigger. I tried to push the thought away. This was my mother. This was my husband. I was being ridiculous. I was letting my post-wedding jitters get the best of me. Later that evening, as Mark and I were driving home, I decided to say something. I tried to make it sound casual, light. "My mom really likes you," I said, forcing a little laugh. I stared out the passenger window, not wanting to look at him. I was afraid of what I might see in his face. He reached over and took my hand. His touch was warm, familiar. "She's great," he said. "It's nice that she's so welcoming. Some mother-in-laws can be a nightmare." I squeezed his hand. "Yeah, she is great," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He was right. I was lucky. My mom was just being nice. I was overthinking everything. I was creating a problem where there was none. I made a promise to myself to let it go, but I couldn't. The feeling lingered. It was a shadow in the corner of my eye, a whisper in the back of my mind. A few weeks went by, and things seemed normal. Mark and I settled into our new life together. We were happy. We built furniture. We cooked together. We dreamed about the future. The memory of that dinner, of my mom's lingering touches and secret glances, started to fade. I convinced myself it had all been in my head. Then came the family barbecue. It was a hot Saturday afternoon. The sun was bright. The sky was a perfect blue. My dad was at the grill, flipping burgers. I was sitting on the patio with my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister. Mark and my mom were inside, supposedly getting drinks. They were gone for a long time. Too long. A familiar unease started to creep back in. I excused myself from my conversation with Aunt Carol. "I'm just going to see what's taking them so long," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I walked into the house. The air inside was cool and quiet. I could hear their voices coming from the kitchen. I slowed my steps, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I didn't want to startle them. I didn't want to seem like I was spying. But I had to know. I stopped just outside the kitchen doorway, hidden from their view. My mom was talking. Her voice was low, soft, almost a purr. It was a voice I had never heard her use before. It was intimate. You know, she was saying, I used to be quite the wild child back in the day. I had a little red convertible. I would drive it way too fast with the top down. She laughed, that same girlish laugh from the dinner party. You would have loved me back then, she said. There was a pause. I held my breath. I could hear the ice clinking in a glass. Then I heard Mark's voice. It was warm, amused. I'm sure I would have, Sharon, he said. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. There was a familiarity in his tone, an easy intimacy that felt wrong. I took a deep breath and stepped into the kitchen. There you guys are, I said, forcing a bright smile. We were getting thirsty out there. They both turned to look at me, and for a split second I saw it. Guilt. They jumped apart, just slightly. My mom's hand, which had been resting on the counter near his, flew to her side. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide. Mark's smile seemed a little too tight, a little too forced. Just getting the lemonade, he said, holding up a pitcher. Your mom was telling me about her old car. My mom busied herself with a tray of glasses. Oh, it was nothing, she said, her voice a little too high. Just silly old stories. I looked from my mom to my husband. The air in the kitchen felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. The bright, sunny day outside suddenly felt a million miles away. This was not in my head. This was real. The pebble in my shoe was no longer a pebble. It was a sharp, jagged rock, and it was digging into my soul. I knew in that moment that something was terribly wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to find out. My happy little world, the one I had so carefully built, was starting to crack. And I was terrified of what I would find in the fissures. The drive home that night was silent. I couldn't bring myself to look at Mark. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur into long yellow streaks. The conversation I'd overheard in the kitchen played over and over in my head. You would have loved me back then. I'm sure I would have. It was so innocent on the surface, but the tone, the context, the way they had jumped when I walked in, it all added up to something ugly. I felt a cold dread spreading through my chest. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom. I needed space. I needed to think. Mark followed me. He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. Are you okay? He asked. You've been quiet all night. I turned to face him. I had to ask. I had to know. You and my mom seemed pretty cozy in the kitchen today, I said. I tried to keep my voice even, but a slight tremor betrayed my anxiety. His face immediately hardened. What are you talking about? He said, his voice sharp with defensiveness. We were just talking. She was telling me a story. I took a step closer to him. It just seemed like more than that, Mark, I said, my voice pleading. The way you looked at each other. He let out a short, harsh laugh. Oh, I see, he said. So now I can't even talk to your mother without you getting suspicious? Is that it? His anger was like a slap in the face. I had expected him to be reassuring, to tell me I was being silly, but instead he was turning it around on me. That's not what I'm saying, I said, my voice rising. I'm just telling you how it looked. It made me uncomfortable. He threw his hands up in the air. Unbelievable, he said. I'm trying to have a good relationship with your family, for you, and this is what I get? Accusations? You're being paranoid, you know that? I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. He wasn't just denying it. He was making me feel like I was crazy. He was gaslighting me. And in that moment, the last of my denial crumbled away. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a betrayal. I didn't have all the pieces yet, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that my husband and my mother were hiding something from me. and I was going to find out what it was. The next morning, the tension in our apartment was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mark acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, he read the news on his tablet, he talked about his plans for the day. He was cheerful, normal. It was a performance, and I knew it. I played along. I made toast. I talked about work. But inside, I was a wreck. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. Was I overreacting? Was he right? Was I just being paranoid? But then I would remember the look on their faces in the kitchen, the way they had jumped apart. I would remember the sharp, defensive anger in his voice. No, I wasn't crazy. Something was wrong. I started to watch them more closely. I became an observer in my own life. I paid attention to every interaction, every word, every look that passed between them. I noticed how my mom's name would pop up on Mark's phone screen far more often than it should. A quick text here, a short phone call there. It was constant. When I asked Mark about it, he always had a plausible excuse. She was just asking for that recipe you like. She needed my help with a computer problem. She was checking in to see how we are. Each excuse was a neat little package tied up with a bow of innocence, but I didn't buy it. Not anymore. One afternoon, I was at my parents' house helping my dad in the garden. My mom was inside, on the phone. I could hear her muffled voice through the open window. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear her tone. It was that same soft, intimate tone she had used with Mark in the kitchen. She was laughing, a low, throaty sound. My dad didn't seem to notice. He was focused on his roses. "Your mother seems to be in a good mood," he said, snipping a dead blossom from a bush. I just nodded, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. "Yeah," I said. "She does." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my best friend, Chloe. "Coffee tomorrow," she wrote. I felt a surge of relief. I needed to talk to someone. I needed a sanity check. I couldn't keep this all inside anymore. It was eating me alive. I texted her back immediately. "Yes, please." We met the next day at our favorite coffee shop. I hadn't even taken a sip of my latte before the words started pouring out of me. I told her everything. The wedding hug, the dinner party, the conversation in the kitchen, Mark's defensiveness, the constant texts. I told her about the phone call I had overheard. As I spoke, I watched her face change from concern to shock to outright horror. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. She just stared at me, her eyes wide. "Oh, honey," she said finally, her voice full of sympathy. That is not good." I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So I'm not crazy?" I asked, my voice small. "No," she said, shaking her head firmly. "You are not crazy. Your mother is acting completely inappropriately, and your husband is, at best, letting it happen, and at worst, encouraging it. This is a massive red flag. A whole parade of red flags." Her validation was like a balm on my frayed nerves. I wasn't imagining it. My feelings were justified. "What do I do, Chloe?" I asked, my eyes welling up with tears. "I've tried talking to him, and he just turns it around on me. He makes me feel like I'm the one with the problem." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. "You need proof," she said, her voice low and serious. "You need something undeniable, something he can't twist or explain away, because right now it's your word against theirs, and they will close ranks. They will protect each other. You need to be smart about this." I nodded, wiping a tear from my cheek. She was right. I needed proof. The thought of what that might entail made me feel sick. But the thought of living in this state of uncertainty, of being gaslit and lied to in my own marriage, was even worse. A new kind of determination started to take root in my heart. I was done being confused and hurt. It was time to get angry. It was time to find the truth. My first step was the phone bill. We had a shared family plan, and the detailed statements were available online. I had never bothered to look at them before. I had trusted Mark completely. That trust was now gone, shattered into a million tiny pieces. That evening, I waited until Mark was in the shower. I went into our home office, my hands trembling slightly as I sat down at the computer. I logged into the phone company's website. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I navigated to the billing section and pulled up the latest statement. I scrolled down to the detailed usage logs. My eyes scanned the page, looking for Mark's number. And then I saw it. The list of calls and texts was long. I started to look at the numbers he had been in contact with. My dad, his own parents, his friends, and then my mom's number. It appeared over and over again. Not just a few times. Dozens of times. I started to count. In the past month alone, there were over 50 text messages and nearly 20 phone calls between them. I looked at the times of the calls. Many of them were late at night after I had gone to bed. One call, just last week, had lasted for 47 minutes. 47 minutes. At 11 o'clock at night. A cold, heavy dread settled in my stomach. What could my husband and my mother possibly have to talk about for 47 minutes late at night? It wasn't about a recipe. It wasn't about a computer problem. It was something else. Something secret. Something they were hiding from me. I printed out the phone records. The black and white pages felt heavy in my hands. This was my first piece of concrete evidence. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was data. It was proof that something was going on. I hid the papers at the bottom of my closet, tucked away in a shoebox. I knew I couldn't confront him with just this. He would have an explanation. He would lie. He was good at lying. I needed more. I needed something he couldn't deny. The next few days were a strange, surreal dance. I went through the motions of my life. I went to work. I made dinner. I watched movies with Mark on the couch. But I was no longer really there. I was a ghost in my own home, watching him, waiting for him to slip up. He seemed to sense the shift in me. He was more attentive, more affectionate. He would bring me flowers. He would tell me he loved me. It felt like a performance, a desperate attempt to pull me back in, to make me forget my suspicions. But it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing into a thorny, tangled mess in my heart. I decided to talk to my mom. I needed to see how she would react. I went over to my parents' house one afternoon when I knew my dad would be out. I found her in the kitchen, humming to herself as she arranged flowers in a vase. She seemed happy, carefree. It made me sick. I sat down at the kitchen table. "Mom," I began, my voice carefully neutral. "I wanted to ask you something." She turned, a bright smile on her face. "Of course, sweetie. What is it?" I took a breath. "You seem to be talking to Mark a lot lately," I said. "On the phone." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes tightened just a fraction. It was a small, almost imperceptible change, but I saw it. "Oh, she said, turning back to her flowers. "We're just getting to know each other. I want him to feel like part of the family." "It seems like more than that," I pressed, my voice getting a little stronger. "There are a lot of calls, late at night." She stopped what she was doing. She put her hands on her hips and turned to face me fully. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a look of maternal concern that I knew was completely fake. "Honey," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Are you feeling all right? You seem a little on edge lately. Is everything okay with you and Mark?" And there it was, the same tactic he had used. Turn it around on me, make me the problem, make me feel crazy. "We're fine," I said, my voice cold. I was just curious. She walked over to the table and sat down across from me. She reached out and tried to take my hand, but I pulled it away. Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite read. Annoyance? Anger? "Listen to me," she said, her voice low and serious. "Mark is a wonderful man, and he loves you very much. But he's new to this family. He needs a friend, someone he can talk to. And sometimes it's easier for him to talk to me about things, little things about you, about what makes you happy. I'm just trying to help him. I'm trying to help you. It was a brilliant lie. It was so plausible, so full of motherly love and concern. A few months ago, I would have believed her. I would have felt guilty for ever doubting her. But not now. Now all I could hear were the lies. All I could see was the manipulation. She was painting herself as the helpful mother-in-law, the supportive friend. But I knew better. I knew she was a snake, and she was slowly, methodically poisoning my marriage. I stood up from the table. "I have to go," I said, my voice flat. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with her for another second. As I walked out the door, I heard her call after me. "I love you, sweetie." Her voice was full of warmth and love. It was all a lie, and it was time to prove it. The phone records were not enough. My mother's lies had only strengthened my resolve. I needed to know what they were saying to each other. I needed to see the words they were typing in secret. The thought of looking at Mark's phone made me feel physically ill. It was a violation of his privacy, a line I had never thought I would cross. But he and my mother had already crossed a much more significant line. They had violated my trust, my marriage, my family. My feelings of guilt were quickly being replaced by a cold, hard anger. I waited for the right opportunity. It came a few nights later. Mark had a couple of beers while watching a football game and fell asleep on the couch. His phone was on the coffee table, just inches from his hand. I watched him for a long time, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. For a moment, I hesitated. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was blowing this all out of proportion. But then I remembered the 47-minute phone call. I remembered the look in my mother's eyes when she lied to my face. My hesitation vanished. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I reached for the phone. My hands were shaking so much I could barely unlock it. I knew his passcode. We had always been open with each other like that. The irony was not lost on me. I opened his messaging app. My fingers hovered over the screen. I scrolled down, looking for my mom's name. And there it was. Sharon. My own mother's name. I tapped on it and the message thread opened. The first few messages were innocent enough. "How's your day going? Don't forget to pick up milk on your way home." But as I scrolled up, the tone began to change. The messages became more frequent, more personal. There were inside jokes I didn't understand. There were compliments. "You looked so handsome today," my mom had written a few days ago. "Thank you," Mark had replied. "You looked beautiful." As always. My breath hitched in my throat. I kept scrolling. It got worse. There were strings of heart emojis. There were late-night conversations that were far too intimate for a son-in-law and a mother-in-law. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their disappointments. They were confiding in each other in a way that he and I no longer did. They were building a world together, a world that I was not a part of. And then I saw it. The thing that made my blood run cold. It was a picture. My mom had sent him a photo of herself. She was wearing a new dress, a slinky red number that was far too young for her. She was posing in front of a mirror, one hand on her hip, her head tilted to the side. She was smiling, a seductive, knowing smile. Underneath the photo, she had written, "What do you think? Too much for a Saturday night?" I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had to see his reply. I scrolled down, my thumb trembling. His response was just 3 words. "Sharon, you look amazing." Amazing. Not nice. Not, "That's a pretty dress." Amazing. The word was a dagger in my heart. I closed the app, my mind reeling. This was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just an emotional affair. This was a deliberate, calculated seduction. And my husband was not an innocent victim. He was a willing participant. I put the phone back on the coffee table, placing it exactly where it had been. I crept back to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. The image of that photo, of my mother's seductive smile and my husband's fawning reply, was burned into my brain. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that I could barely breathe. It wasn't just Mark who had betrayed me. It was my own mother. The one person in the world who was supposed to protect me, to love me unconditionally. She had taken a knife and plunged it straight into my back, and my husband had held me still for her. I knew I had to confront him. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't go on living this lie. I waited until the next morning. I let him get up, get dressed, have his coffee. I wanted him to be fully awake. I wanted him to be able to understand every single word I was about to say. I found him in the living room, reading the news on his tablet. The same tablet he had been reading the morning after he had lied to my face about the conversation in the kitchen. I stood in front of him, blocking his view of the screen. He looked up, a slightly annoyed expression on his face. "What is it?" he asked. "I saw the texts, Mark," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as sharp as a shard of glass. I watched the color drain from his face. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He didn't even pretend to be confused. "What texts?" he said, his voice a weak attempt at denial. "The text between you and my mother," I said, my voice getting stronger. "The compliments, the heart emojis, the picture of her in the red dress." His eyes widened. He looked like a cornered animal. "You went through my phone?" he stammered, his voice a mixture of shock and anger. "You had no right to do that." "No right?" I said, my voice rising with every word. "You think I had no right? You have been having an affair with my mother behind my back, and you want to talk to me about rights? About privacy?" He stood up, his face a mask of fury. "It is not an affair," he yelled. "We are just friends. That's it. You are being jealous and insecure, and you are blowing this whole thing out of proportion." It was the same defense he had used before, but this time I was ready for it. "Friends?" I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you send pictures of yourself in slinky dresses to all your friends, Mark? Do you tell them they look amazing? Do you send them hearts late at night?" He was silent. He had no answer. He just stared at me, his jaw clenched. The fight that followed was the worst one of our lives. He yelled. I screamed. He accused me of being a snooping, untrusting wife. I accused him of being a lying, cheating snake. He tried to twist the narrative, to make it my fault. He said I had pushed him away. He said I was cold, distant. He said my mother was the only one who understood him. Every word he spoke was another twist of the knife. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't remorseful. He was just angry that he had gotten caught. By the end of it, I was exhausted, drained of all emotion. I looked at the man standing in front of me, his face red with anger, and I felt nothing. The love I had once felt for him was gone, replaced by a cold, empty void. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "Just for a few days. I need some space to think." He stared at me for a long moment, then he nodded curtly. "Fine," he said. He went into the bedroom, packed a bag, and left without another word. The sound of the front door closing echoed in the silent apartment. I sank onto the couch. The same couch where he had been sleeping so peacefully just a few hours before. I was alone. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe. But I knew this was far from over. This was just the beginning. Mark was gone, but the problem wasn't solved. He was just a symptom. The disease was my mother. I knew that even if Mark was out of the picture, she would continue to be a toxic presence in my life. She had shown me her true colors, and I could never unsee them. The days after our fight were a blur of anger and grief. I called in sick to work. I couldn't face people. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. I spent hours just sitting in silence, replaying every conversation, every interaction, every lie. I felt like a fool. How had I not seen it sooner? The signs had all been there, but I had been too in love, too trusting to see them. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Mark. "I'm so sorry. I love you. Can we please talk?" I ignored them all. His words were meaningless now. They were just more lies. My mother called too. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice full of fake concern. "Honey, it's me. I heard Mark is staying at a hotel. Is everything all right? I'm so worried about you. Please call me." The hypocrisy was staggering. She was the one who had caused all of this, and now she was pretending to be the concerned mother. It made my blood boil. I needed a plan. Confronting them had only resulted in more lies and gaslighting. They were a team, and they would do whatever it took to protect their dirty little secret. I needed more than just text messages. I needed something so damning, so undeniable, that they wouldn't be able to talk their way out of it. I needed to expose them, not just to myself, but to everyone, especially to my dad. The thought of telling him made me feel sick. He loved my mom. He trusted her. This would destroy him. But he deserved to know the truth. He deserved to know who he was married to. I decided to talk to my Aunt Carol again. She was my mom's older sister, but she was always the more grounded, level-headed one. They were close, but Carol had no illusions about her sister's flaws. I called her and asked if I could come over. I needed to talk. I drove to her house, my stomach in knots. I didn't know how much to tell her. I didn't want to sound like a hysterical, jealous daughter. I needed to be calm, rational. I sat in her cozy living room, a cup of tea warming my hands. I started slowly. I didn't accuse my mother of anything directly. Instead, I asked questions. "Aunt Carol," I began, "has my mom seemed different to you lately? A little too happy, maybe?" Carol looked at me, her expression thoughtful. She took a slow sip of her tea. "Your mother," she said, choosing her words carefully, "has always been a woman who needs a lot of attention, especially from men. It's just the way she is." My heart sank. This wasn't new behavior. This was a pattern. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. She sighed. "Sharon has always been beautiful," she said, "and she knows it. She likes the way men look at her. It makes her feel powerful. When you were growing up, your father gave her all the attention she needed, but as they've gotten older, things have cooled down. He's more interested in his garden than in telling her how pretty she is. I think she's been feeling a little neglected, a little invisible." I thought about my dad, a quiet, gentle man who showed his love through actions, not words. He wasn't flashy or effusive, but his love for my mother was deep and steady. But for her, it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed adoration. And she had found it in my husband. "She would never do anything to hurt me, though, right?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to hear her say it. I needed her to tell me that my mother, for all her flaws, still had a moral compass. But Carol's eyes were full of pity. "Honey," she said softly, "when your mother wants something, she can be very single-minded. She has a way of justifying her actions, of convincing herself that what she's doing isn't wrong. She lives in her own little world, and in that world, her happiness is the most important thing." The conversation confirmed my worst fears. My mother was not just a flirt. She was a narcissist. She was incapable of seeing the pain she was causing because she was too consumed with her own desires. She was a predator, and she had set her sights on my husband, not caring that she would have to destroy her own daughter to get him. I left my aunt's house with a heavy heart, but also with a new sense of clarity. I knew what I was up against, and I knew that I couldn't fight this battle with half measures. I needed a weapon, something that would blow their world apart. And I had an idea of how to get it. My plan was risky. It was deceitful. It made me feel like I was stooping to their level, but I was desperate. I had an old smartphone tucked away in a drawer. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I charged it up and downloaded a simple, voice-activated recording app. It was designed for students to record lectures, but I had a much more sinister purpose in mind. I knew my mom had been wanting to come over to my apartment to talk. She had been texting me, pleading with me to let her in. I had been ignoring her, but now I saw an opportunity. I texted her back. "You can come over tomorrow afternoon," I wrote. "I'm going to be out for a few hours, but you can let yourself in with the spare key. We can talk when I get back." It was the perfect bait. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the chance to snoop around my apartment. And I knew she would probably call Mark as soon as she was inside. I set my trap. The next day, before I left, I activated the recording app on the old phone. I hid it under a cushion on the living room couch, the microphone pointing out. It was a long shot. It might not work. She might not say anything incriminating. But it was the only chance I had. I left the apartment, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. I went to a movie, but I couldn't focus on the screen. My mind was back in my living room, imagining my mother walking in, picking up the phone, and dialing Mark's number. I felt like a spy in a cheap thriller. After a few hours, I couldn't stand it anymore. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I let myself into the apartment. It was quiet. Everything looked normal. For a moment, I thought my plan had failed. I walked over to the couch and reached under the cushion. The old phone was still there. I picked it up, my hands trembling. I stopped the recording and put in my headphones. I didn't want to risk anyone hearing it. I pressed play. At first, there was just silence. Then I heard the sound of the front door opening. I heard my mother's footsteps. I heard her moving around the apartment. Then I heard the sound of her dialing a number on her phone. My breath caught in my throat. I heard her voice, clear as day. "Hi, it's me," she said. "She's not here. She left me a key." There was a pause. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of Mark's voice on the other end of the line. "I know," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We have to be careful. She's suspicious. She asked me about the phone calls." Another pause. "No, of course I didn't tell her anything. I told her she was being paranoid. I told her I was just trying to help you." She laughed, that same girlish laugh that now made my skin crawl. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This was it. This was the proof I needed. But it was about to get so much worse. "She's so naive," my mother continued, her voice full of contempt. "She doesn't suspect a thing. Not really. She just thinks we're a little too friendly." I could hear Mark's voice again, a little clearer this time. He was agreeing with her. "It's better this way," he said. "We can't hurt her." Hurt me? They had already shattered my world. They had already hurt me in a way I never thought possible. And then came the final devastating blow, the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was my mother's voice again, cold and calculating. "Listen," she said. "We just have to be patient. You know David's heart isn't what it used to be. The doctor said he needs to avoid stress. Once he's gone, we can be together properly. No one will be able to say anything then. It will be perfectly natural for the grieving widow to find comfort with her supportive son-in-law." I ripped the headphones from my ears, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. They weren't just having an affair. They were waiting for my father to die. My kind, gentle, loving father. They were waiting for his heart to give out so they could have their sordid little happily ever after. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was monstrous. This was evil. I sat there on the floor of my silent apartment, the recording clutched in my hand, and I felt something inside me snap. The hurt, the grief, the sadness. It all burned away, leaving behind a pure, cold, unadulterated rage. They had underestimated me. They thought I was naive. They thought I was weak. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The rage was a fire in my veins. It burned away the tears, the confusion, the self-doubt. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I listened to the recording one more time, forcing myself to hear every single monstrous word. Then, I saved the audio file. I emailed it to myself. I uploaded it to a secure cloud server. I made 3 separate copies on 3 different USB drives. I was not going to lose this. This recording was my sword and my shield. It was the truth, and the truth was going to set me free. And it was going to burn their world to the ground. My first call was to a lawyer. I found a top-rated divorce attorney and scheduled a consultation for the next day. I needed to know my rights. I needed to be prepared. My second call was to my best friend, Chloe. I told her I had what I needed. I didn't go into detail over the phone. I just said, "It's worse than we ever imagined." Her voice was grim. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to end it," I said. "All of it." My plan was simple. It was theatrical. It was cruel. They deserved nothing less. I was going to host one last family dinner. I texted my dad. "Can you and Mom come over for dinner on Saturday night? I'm making your favorite pot roast. I'd like for us all to talk." He responded almost immediately. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll be there." Then I texted Mark. "We need to talk, face to face. Be at our apartment on Saturday at 7. My parents will be there." He replied with a single word. "Okay." The stage was set. The actors were all in place. All I had to do was deliver my final lines. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of preparing for the dinner party. I cleaned the apartment. I went grocery shopping. I chopped vegetables. Each mundane task was a small step towards the inevitable conclusion. I was calm, terrifyingly calm. The emotional storm inside me had passed, leaving behind an eerie, quiet stillness. I was no longer a victim. I was an executioner. Saturday night arrived. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress. I wanted to look strong, composed. Mark arrived first. He looked nervous, haggard. He had been staying at a cheap hotel, and it showed. He tried to approach me, to hug me. "I've missed you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't," I said, my voice cold and flat. "Not now. Not ever again." He recoiled as if I had slapped him. He sat down on the couch, the same couch where I had hidden the recording device, and stared at the floor. My parents arrived a few minutes later. My dad was smiling, holding a bottle of wine. "This is nice, honey," he said, kissing me on the cheek. My mom followed him in. She was wearing a bright, cheerful dress. She looked at Mark, then at me, her face a mask of concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We'll talk about it at dinner," I said. I took the wine from my dad and went into the kitchen. I could feel their eyes on my back. The tension in the room was palpable. We sat down at the dinner table. I served the pot roast. No one ate. The silence was deafening. Finally, my dad couldn't take it anymore. "All right," he said, putting his fork down. "What's going on? You two look like you're at a funeral." I took a deep breath. It was time. "Mark and I are getting a divorce," I said, my voice clear and steady. I looked directly at Mark. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. My mom let out a theatrical gasp. "Oh, honey, no," she said, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away. "What?" my dad said, looking back and forth between me and Mark. "What happened? I thought you two were so happy." Mark finally found his voice. "I don't want this," he said, his voice pleading. He looked at me. We can work this out. Whatever this is about, we can fix it. He then turned to my mom. Sharon, talk to her, please. It was a fatal mistake. He had just revealed his most important ally. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, I don't think my mother is going to be much help here, I said. I turned to my dad. My heart ached for what I was about to do to him, but it had to be done. Dad, I said, my voice softening just a little. The reason we're getting a divorce is because my husband has been having an affair with my mother. The room exploded. My mother started screaming. That's a lie. A vicious, horrible lie. How could you say something like that about your own mother? My dad looked stunned, his face pale. What are you talking about? He said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Mark was on his feet. She's making it up. She went through my phone and twisted everything. We're just friends. They were a united front, a chorus of denial and indignation, but I was ready for them. I'm not making it up, I said calmly. And I have more than just text messages. I stood up and walked over to the small Bluetooth speaker I had placed on the sideboard. I took out my phone. I have a recording, I said, from 2 days ago, right here in this apartment. I saw the flicker of panic in my mother's eyes. I saw the dawning horror on Mark's face. They knew. They knew what was on that recording. Don't you dare, my mother hissed, her voice low and menacing. But it was too late. I pressed play. The sound of my mother's voice filled the silent room. She's so naive. She doesn't suspect a thing. I watched my dad's face as he listened. I saw the confusion turn to disbelief, and the disbelief turned to a deep, gut-wrenching pain. Then came Mark's voice. It's better this way. We can't hurt her. My dad's eyes flickered to Mark, a look of pure contempt on his face. And then the final, unforgivable words. My mother's voice, cold and cruel, talking about my father's heart condition, talking about waiting for him to die. Once he's gone, we can be together properly. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any I had ever experienced. It was the silence of a world that had been completely and irrevocably shattered. My dad slowly got to his feet. He was shaking, but not from weakness. It was from a rage so deep, so absolute, that it seemed to vibrate in the very air around him. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Mark. He looked at his wife of 30 years, the mother of his child, the woman who was calmly and coolly waiting for him to die. When he finally spoke, his voice was terrifyingly quiet. Sharon, he said, get out of my house. My mother started to sob, a pathetic theatrical display. David, please, she wailed. She's trying to ruin us. That recording is fake. My dad took a step towards her, and for a second, I thought he might hit her. But he just stood there, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. I said, he repeated, his voice like stone, get out of my house, now. She seemed to shrink under the force of his gaze. The fight went out of her. She stood up, her face a mess of tears and makeup, and stumbled out of the apartment without another word. Then my dad turned his attention to Mark. The look in his eyes was murderous. And you, he said, his voice trembling with fury. Get away from my daughter, and if you ever come near her, or me, or my family again, I will make you regret the day you were born. Mark didn't need to be told twice. He practically scrambled out of his chair and fled the apartment, not even daring to look at me. And then there were two of us, me and my dad, standing in the ruins of our family. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a pain so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just shook his head, and then he did something he hadn't done since I was a little girl. He wrapped his arms around me and held me tight, and he began to cry. I held on to him, my own tears finally falling, and we just stood there together, two broken people in a broken home. The war was over, and I had won. but it felt nothing like a victory. The days that followed were a quiet, painful blur of logistics. My dad, true to his word, filed for divorce the very next morning. He was a man transformed. The quiet, gentle gardener was gone, replaced by a man of grim, unyielding purpose. He hired the most ruthless lawyer he could find. He told me he was going to make sure my mother left the marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back. "She's not getting another penny of my money to build a new life with him," he told me, his voice hard as steel. I had never seen him like this, and while it was unsettling, it was also deeply reassuring. He was fighting, not just for himself, but for me. Mark tried to contact me. He sent a barrage of texts, each one more desperate than the last. I know I messed up. I was confused. She manipulated me. "Please just talk to me. I love you." I read them all, a cold, detached curiosity my only emotion. His words were like a foreign language, devoid of any meaning. I blocked his number. He then started emailing me. I set up a filter to send his emails directly to the trash. A week later, I was served with divorce papers. He had filed, citing irreconcilable differences. It was the fastest, easiest part of the whole ordeal. He didn't fight for anything. He just wanted out. He was a coward, running from the mess he had created. I spoke to my dad every day. Our conversations were short, practical. We talked about lawyers, about finances, about selling the house. We didn't talk about what had happened. It was too raw, too painful. But one evening he called me and his voice was different, softer. "Can I come over?" he asked. "I need to talk to you." He came to my apartment, the one that was now just mine, and we sat at the same table where our family had imploded. He looked older, tired. There were new lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I should have seen it." "It's not your fault, Dad," I said, my own eyes welling up. "She fooled both of us." He shook his head. "No," he said. "I knew what she was like. I always knew she needed attention, that she was selfish. But I never dreamed she was capable of something so evil." He looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible guilt. "I brought that man into your life," he said. "I welcomed him. I treated him like a son." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You had a good heart," I said. "You saw the good in people. That's not a weakness." We sat in silence for a while, our hands clasped together. In the midst of all this wreckage, our bond, the one that had always been quiet and steady, was now stronger than ever. A few weeks later, I got a call from my Aunt Carol. "I just thought you should know," she said, her voice hesitant. "I spoke to Sharon." I stiffened. "What did she want?" I asked, my voice cold. "She's a wreck," Carol said. "Your father has frozen all their joint accounts. She has no money. She's staying with a friend. She's been calling everyone in the family, trying to tell her side of the story, but no one is listening. No one will even speak to her. She's completely alone." A part of me should have felt some pity, some flicker of compassion for my own mother. But I felt nothing. She had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. "And Mark?" I asked, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "She said he's gone," Carol replied. "He left town. She said he told her he couldn't handle the drama, that she had ruined his life. He blamed her for everything." I almost laughed. Of course he did. It was a fitting end for them. Two selfish, destructive people who had turned on each other the moment things got difficult. They deserved each other. And now they had nothing. The divorce was finalized in record time. Mark didn't contest anything. I got the apartment, the car, everything. I think he was just so desperate to be free of the situation that he would have signed anything. My parents' divorce was much messier, but in the end, my dad's lawyer was better. My mother ended up with a small settlement, Enough to live on, but not enough to live the lavish lifestyle she had been accustomed to. The family home was sold. My dad bought a smaller place, a quiet little house with a big garden. He seemed happier there, lighter. He was free of her. One day, I was cleaning out the last of Mark's things from the back of my closet. I found a small box of photos. I sat on the floor and started going through them. There were pictures of us on vacation, at parties, with friends. We looked so happy, so in love. It was like looking at two strangers. And then I found it. A framed photo from our wedding day. It was a picture of the three of us. Me, in my white dress, beaming at the camera. Mark, standing beside me, his arm around my waist, a polite smile on his face. And my mother, standing on his other side. She was looking at him, not at the camera. Her eyes were full of a hungry, possessive adoration. Her hand was on his arm, her fingers digging in, claiming him as her own. I stared at the picture for a long time. It was all there, right from the very beginning. The proof had been in front of my eyes the whole time, but I had refused to see it. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and dropped the photo into the trash can. I felt a profound sense of relief, of release. It was finally over. I had survived. I had lost a husband and a mother, but I had found myself. I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. They had thought I was naive. They had thought I was a pawn in their sick little game. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten that I was my father's daughter, and we were survivors. They had tried to destroy me, but all they had done was set me free. They had finally learned what it feels like to be small, to be powerless, to lose everything. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to burn it all down and start again. And that's exactly what I was going to do.